Hello, you guys. Let's talk about equivalent fractions. So our goal is to write equivalent fractions. So let's say I had 8 over 12. Well, I could divide both the numerator and denominator by 4 to make 2/3. So these are what we call equivalent fractions. Also, if I started with 8 over 12, as I could multiply both the numerator and denominator by the same amount. For example, 2. So 8 times 2 would give me 16. 12 times 2 would give me 24. So 16 over 24 is also an equivalent fraction. Now, when they say simplest form, that means we have to reduce as much as we possibly can. Okay? So take a look here at example 1, writing equivalent fractions. They usually want us to write 2 fractions that are equivalent to, and in this case, 6 over 18. So honestly, the first thing I would do, look down here, you could start with 6 over 18 and then divide both the numerator and denominator by the same amount. Now, I would have divided by 6, but your book divided by 3. So if you divide both the top and the bottom by 3, you would get 2 over 6. Another thing we could do is use multiplication. So we could start with 6 over 18 and then just multiply the numerator and denominator by the same amount. For example, 2, and we would get 12 over 36. So the fractions 12 over 36 and 2 over 6 are equivalent to 6 over 18. Now notice that these fractions are not in simplest form. Okay, so take a look at the checkpoint. Write 2 fractions that are equivalent to the given fraction. So if they start me off with 7 over 14, notice how the first thing I did is I wrote the 7 over 14 twice. And then on the top one, I divided both the numerator and denominator by 7, so I got 1 over 2. On the bottom one, I decided to multiply both the numerator and denominator by 2, so I get 14 over 28. So 1/2 and 14 over 28 are equivalent fractions to 7 over 14. Take a look at number 2, starting off with 4 over 16. So I wrote it twice because they want 2 answers. And then on the top one, I divided by 4 in the numerator and denominator, so I got 1 over 4. And on the bottom one, I multiplied by 2, both the top and the bottom, so I got 8 over 32. And that gave me 2 equivalent fractions. All right, take a look at number 3, 10 over 25. First, write it twice. And then on the top one, I try to reduce if I can, so I divided both the top and the bottom by 5, and that gave me 2 over 5. And on the second one, I try to multiply, and I just multiply by 2 because it's easy, and 10 times 2 is 20, 25 times 2 is 50. So that gave me my 2 equivalent fractions. Okay, now, example 2 wants us to write the fraction in simplest form. So when we want to write a fraction in simplest form, we have to use the greatest common factor of the numerator and denominator. So here they're suggesting that you prime factorize the numerator and denominator. So the prime factorization of 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. The prime factorization of 36 is 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. And notice how they have 2 2's in common, so that would mean the greatest common factor is 4. So if I divide both the numerator and denominator by 4, that will give me 2 over 9, which is in simplest form. All right, take a look at checkpoint. Write the fraction in simplest form, and I want you to use the greatest common factor of the numerator and denominator. So take a look at number 4. I wrote 3 over 18. I know 3 is the greatest common factor of 3 and 18, so I divided by 3, the top and the bottom. That gave me 1 over 6. Take a look at number 5, 12 and 32. So the greatest common factor of 12 and 32 is 4, so that's what I used to simplify. So 12 divided by 4 gave me 3 in the numerator, 32 divided by 4 gave me 8 in the denominator. And then take a look at number 6, 24 and 42. So the greatest common factor of both of those numbers is 6, so I divided the numerator and denominator by 6, and that gave me 4 over 7. Okay, let's talk about example 3, simplifying a variable expression. So they want us to write 14x squared y over 35x cubed in simplest form. Now here's what you're going to hear me say a lot. Write it out, strike it out, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So take the numerator, 14x squared y, and prime factorize it. Write it out in expanded form. So 14 is 2 times 7, and then I wrote out x to the second power is x times x, and then I put the y there, times y. On the bottom, in the denominator, 35 could be 5 times 7, and then I wrote out x cubed as x times x times x. So you want to factor the numerator and denominator completely. Now, after you write it out, you want to strike out the common factors. So notice how they had 7 in the top and the bottom, so I struck it out. They had an x in the top and the bottom, so I struck it out. And they had another x in the top and the bottom that matched, so I struck it out. And so that left me with 2y on top and 5x on the bottom. So 2y over 5x is the simplest form. But I want you to notice something else. Look at what I struck out. If they ask you what's the greatest common factor of the two monomials, you would say 7x squared. That's what you used to reduce the fraction, to simplify the fraction. Okay, so look at the checkpoint with me. Write the variable expression in simplest form. So look at number 7, 9a on top. So I wrote that as 3 times a, and 15a squared on the bottom. So I wrote that as 3 times 5 times a. And so we wrote it out. Now we're going to strike it out. So they have a 3 on the top and the bottoms that match, so I strike it out. They have an a on the top and the bottom that match, so I strike that out. That leaves me with 3 in the numerator and 5a in the denominator. So 3 over 5a is the simplest form. But remember, the greatest common factor that I used to simplify it was 3a. That's what I struck out. Okay, take a look at 8. 16mn squared. So I wrote 16 as prime factors, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and then I brought down the m, and then n to the second power is n times n. Now with 28n in the denominator, I wrote 2 times 2 times 7 times n. So after I write it out, I strike it out. So the 2's match on the top and the bottom, so I struck those out. Another set of 2's match, so I struck out another pair of 2's. And then the letter n matches in the top and the bottom, so I struck that out. So that left me with 2 times m times n in the numerator. That would be 4mn, and it left me with 7 in the denominator. So that gives me 4mn over 7. So that's the fraction in simplest form. But now remember, if I ask you, you use the greatest common factor of 4n to reduce these variable expressions. Okay, take a look at number 9. 39st to the second power. So I wrote it as 3 times 13 times s times t, and then in the denominator it's 3s squared t. So I wrote that as 3 times s times s times t. And now after I write it out, I strike it out. So the 3's match, so I struck those out. The s's match, so I struck those out. And t's match, so I struck those out. And so that left me with 13t in the numerator and just s in the denominator. So 13t over s is my simplified expression. And then remember, my greatest common factor that I struck out was 15t.